For 3 months, I meticulously arranged a 7-night voyage on a luxurious ship, a trip exclusively for the two of us. I embarked with high hopes of romance, having flown across miles with an open heart. However, it wasn't until the third day of our cruise that I recognized my wife had not accompanied me in the spirit I anticipated. We have been married for 16 years. Paige and I together we purchased a home in a tranquil suburb outside Portland, methodically paying it off year after year, filling it with the routine life two people construct when they believe they have plenty of time. And throughout those 16 years, not once did we take a genuine vacation. There was always an excuse. The mortgage, her job, mine, or a roof that needed repairing. We constantly deferred the trip for later. Hence, when I reserved the cruise, it felt like I was finally honoring a commitment I had carried within me for years. Our journey traversed the Inside Passage to Alaska, setting sail from Seattle. In our ocean view cabin, I selected the option with a window overlooking the water. I didn't choose the budget alternative. I wanted her to understand that this trip signified importance to me and that we were significant in my eyes. I invested 3 months researching, comparing ships, delving into port information, deciding on the cabin deck. It often brought a smile to my face just thinking about it. 16 years had passed without us being stationary together. Some part of me felt this journey would restore what time had subtly eroded. We set off from Portland in the countryside, luggage at the rear, coffee in the cup holders. Paige was 39, I was 46. During that drive, she laughed at a radio joke and patted my hand. I felt assured we'd be all right. I genuinely believed it. I want you to understand that I truly believed it. Strange occurrences started in the early days before I even named them. Paige frequently disappeared. She had minor excuses each time, once for coffee, another for a forgotten sweater, then for souvenir shopping. These actions, individually, were normal. However, her prolonged absences became unusual. People tend to roam on a ship, but she was gone for extended periods. She wouldn't be gone for just 10 minutes. It was an hour instead. And when she returned, she was slightly out of breath, her eyes gleaming with some tale about waiting in line at the cafe or taking a detour through a wrong corridor. Initially, I believed her narratives, attributing them to the initial confusion that comes with navigating such a large vessel, assuming she had simply lost her way. I occupied myself by pouring a drink and watching the coastline glide past the window, anticipating her return. However, what I failed to comprehend was that a cruise ship is designed in a manner that eliminates long distances. There's a bar on almost every deck, pools, lounges, a cafe at every turn. Everything is readily accessible. This is the essence of its appeal. Consequently, when my wife vanished for an hour to fetch coffee from a location barely 2 hallways away, the logic seemed flawed. I remained silent, not wishing to be perceived as the husband overly concerned with time. Yet I found myself counting those minutes discreetly every time she reassured me she would return shortly. Each glance at the clock filled me with self-reproach. I observed 2 additional peculiarities, and they were difficult to rationalize. The initial oddity was the internet. Off-board connection is costly and sluggish, frequently disconnecting, causing most travelers to abandon it within 2 days. They store their phones away and appreciate the natural surroundings. That's a significant part of the experience. However, Paige acted differently. She fixated on her phone as if it had an obligation towards her. She would remove it to check work emails. She would step outdoors to text her mother. She held it as one would a valuable item, keeping it close and always within reach, screened towards her. The second occurrence transpired during the 4th afternoon. I phoned her to inquire about an early dinner. She was absent, her usual location. After several attempts, my calls went unanswered for 40 minutes. When she eventually returned, she apologized and stated that she hadn't heard the phone ring. Hadn't heard it ring. She had clutched this phone throughout each day and night since we acquired it, never letting it rest on a table. And for an astonishing 40 minutes, she hadn't detected its ringing. I pondered over this silence for a while before I forced myself to cease my thoughts. I was fatigued, reaching conclusions beyond reason, contemplating jealousy that could fabricate a crime from a delayed elevator and poor signal. I didn't want to become such an individual. So I suppressed those feelings, flashed her a smile, and we proceeded to dinner. The subsequent evening found me preoccupied with work demands, necessitating my undivided attention for an hour, and Paige suggested going for a solitary walk. I granted her permission. At night, the upper decks are chilly. The wind slices through from the water, biting even during the summer months, let alone at that latitude where the light lingered in the sky. When she returned to the cabin, she wore a man's jacket, dark, weighty, heavier than any of her own belongings, and it was not mine. I recognized every article of clothing I had packed, yet that jacket hadn't been among them. Inquiring casually, not loudly, about its origin, she momentarily seemed at a loss for an answer. The response eventually surfaced. She explained she had encountered an old contact on the deck, someone she hadn't seen in years, a man traveling with his family. They'd shared a drink. He had observed her feeling cold and lent her his jacket, which she had subsequently forgotten to return. Her story was well crafted. It even sounded plausible when one has time to construct it. However, I lacked any concrete evidence, but my instincts, seldom deceptive, were on high alert. From that point forward, I kept vigil. Each of her movements was within my purview. The following night, I waited until the cabin was in darkness and imitated the breath of a sleeping man. It wasn't long before. Paige quietly exited bed, softly opened the door, and vanished. As soon as it closed, I was awake. I trailed behind her, moving through the corridor and onto the decks, maintaining distance with others filling the gap. At night, a ship offers ample hiding spots. Music echoed, strangers mingled, providing cover for me to blend in. For a brief instant, I lost sight of Paige near a stairwell, but soon spotted her again. Later, I noticed them, occupying a secluded table in a corner where the crowd thinned, engaged in conversation and sharing tender smiles devoid of an audience's gaze. He gently adjusted her hair, wrapped his arm around her waist, then swiftly leaned in for a kiss. A sensation of constraint gripped me, impelling me to stride over to their table and demand eye contact. However, I refrained. Their display before a crowd would merely provide her the narrative she desired. In a hurry, I returned swiftly to our cabin, eager to hear truth from her lips. I wished to comprehend the identity of this man in her life. Was he an old friend who lent her a coat? Perhaps someone she met aboard the ship? However, the actual truth I couldn't fathom. As I waited, I prepared for our departure by gathering her belongings from the closet and drawers, carefully folding each item into her suitcase. Placing it in the cabin center, I stood beside it without a plan. When Paige entered, she anticipated one of two possibilities: me asleep or me watching something on screen. Instead, she found her own packed suitcase illuminated and me standing next to it. "Who was the man you appeared to be embracing on that deck?" I observed everything clearly, so attempt not to deceive me. She quickly deflected almost before my question was fully uttered. She claimed, "You have misunderstood the situation entirely. We were merely conversing. Stop causing a commotion." She persisted, distorting the truth, asserting that I had misperceived what transpired and insinuating that I was the issue in the room. I remained silent, as there was no merit in engaging further. I wheeled her suitcase out into the narrow ship's corridor and left her at the door. The hallway fell silent on the other side of it. I stood firm on my side, refusing to reopen the door. The following morning, I arrived late for breakfast. There they were, the two of them seated together in the open dining area, no more corners or hiding places. They no longer required it, and there was no facade about it. I averted my gaze from them for extended periods. I consumed my coffee and meal without feeling compelled to approach. Post-breakfast, I descended to the front desk. I requested them to sever Pages from any shared documents and instructed them to bill any subsequent expenses of hers exclusively to her individual account. From that day, she couldn't utilize a penny of mine for a vacation with another man. Moreover, I made it official that we were no longer co-traveling, no longer sharing the cabin. This left me alone on the ship for 4 days and let me share an honest truth about those days. They weren't festive. I dined alone and continued to observe, in a peculiar, subdued manner, that there was no longer any need for performance across the table. I read on the balcony because the cabin felt burdened by her absence, and the fresh air outside was more comfortable to breathe. At night, I'd ascend to the railing and listen to the water collide against the hull. For the first time in years, there was true quiet, and though it wasn't peace, it was undeniably mine. No one deceived me within its confines. I journeyed back to my house outside Portland alone, and as soon as I arrived, I picked up the shared tablet. We had a single account, a joint login, with everything automatically syncing without a second thought. Photos, notes, messages, they all gathered in one spot. Paige perhaps didn't consider the tablet, or maybe she'd forgotten it existed. Yet there it was, months of it, waiting. Every message between her and that man appeared before me, organized chronologically, like a book I'd never been permitted to read. Any remnant of hope I held on to, that this was merely a fleeting shipboard affair or an isolated weak moment, withered away when I beheld the screen. I discovered his cruise ticket, their chosen dates, and conversations about secret rendezvous on board the ship before the voyage even began. Discovers the devastating aspect of the situation. Instead of a casual affair, she deliberately arranged the trip that we had spent 3 months planning together. It was not an impulsive decision on her part. She had been meticulously planning it all along, with the intention for the 3 of us. The following day, I visited a lawyer and filed for divorce without second thoughts. The bond in our marriage was already severed when we were on that water, and I realized it. A fortnight later, Paige sent me a lengthy message expressing regret and deep remorse. She felt she had made the gravest mistake of her life and needed to meet with me to explain and make me comprehend. She didn't respond during our initial encounter, prompting a change in her tactics. Indirectly, she approached me via mutual friends, encouraging them to speak with me. She also enlisted my parents, asking them to intervene and soften my stance. The recurring message was clear. She sought counseling, relinquished any contested property without resistance, and was willing to forfeit everything if given another opportunity. However, neither my family nor friends yielded, instead echoing my position. Some weeks later, I discovered an additional piece of information. The man she had orchestrated the entire trip around, who she had sacrificed 16 years for, ended their relationship shortly after we disembarked from the ship. The divorce proceedings ensued, and every effort she made to resume our dialogue, I chose to ignore. This was not done out of malice. I held no desire to reclaim the phone. I pondered if I could have acted differently. If this incident was merely an unfortunate night, an excessive drink, a misstep she later mourned, perhaps I would have endured it longer. Perhaps I would have listened to her explanations. People trip up and a marriage can accommodate such falls. But that's not what transpired here. You don't slip into a calendar. You don't stumble into instructing another man on cabin selection so he lies near your spouse. This wasn't a mistake she made. It was a vacation she arranged, intended for both of them, and I was merely the one who footed the bill. Once the divorce was finalized, the house remained mine, along with the rest we had constructed. I won't feign that this didn't matter. After 16 years, a man should not leave empty-handed. However, it had already ended before any of that. It ended on the ship in that confined corridor. Nightfall, I wheeled her luggage beyond the threshold and latched the door. Subsequent events were merely forms filling out what I had anticipated. For him, this voyage was an attempt to reignite their passion and share idyllic moments. Yet his wife envisioned this extravagant holiday in the company of another man instead of her spouse. She believed that amidst the ship's grandeur, she could effortlessly indulge in dual desires. However, a grievous error precipitated her unmasking.